You little home-wrecking bitch. The venomous text from an unknown number glared at me from Clayton's phone screen. I felt like I had been punched in the gut as I read through the rest of the messages, each one more vile than the last. You think you can just waltz in and replace my mom? You're nothing but a gold-digging whore. My hands began to tremble as the full weight of the words hit me. This had to be from Brielle, Clayton's daughter from his previous marriage, the one he spoke about so fondly, yet I had never met. I'm going to make your life a living nightmare, you deceitful snake. Tears stung my eyes as I dropped the phone onto the coffee table, flooded with a toxic mixture of shock, hurt, and anger. How could a teenage girl I had never even met despise me with such vitriol? The front door opened and slammed shut as Clayton rushed in from work, briefcase in hand. Leona, you home, babe? I remained frozen on the couch, unable to find my voice to respond. Clayton rounded the corner into the living room, his expression shifting from bright smiles to knitted concern when he saw my distressed state. Hey, what's wrong? He immediately closed the distance between us, taking a seat by my side. I could only mutely point at his phone lying on the table. Clayton's brow furrowed in confusion as he scooped it up to inspect the screen. I watched as the color drained from his face while he read through the messages. Oh, God, he muttered under his breath, dragging a hand down his face. Brielle? Is that seriously from your daughter? I demanded, the words finally finding their way out amidst my anger. What the hell, Clayton? What did I ever do to her to deserve being called such horrible things? Clayton opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, feeling an onslaught of pent-up emotions from the past few months bubbling over. I've been nothing but nice about her, despite how weird it is that my own stepchild has been kept a total secret from me. I defended you when my friends wondered why I hadn't met her yet, trusted that you had your reasons. But this is unacceptable. Leona, please, just let me explain, Clayton pleaded, his eyes carrying a pained desperation. Explain what? That your daughter seems to hate my guts for no good reason? That she's apparently been talking about me like this behind my back from the very beginning? I could feel angry tears streaking down my cheeks as I met his remorseful gaze. If this is the way she really feels, then maybe we're making a huge mistake here. The implication hung heavy in the air between us. Clayton and I had only been married for 3 months, but Brielle's unexpected hostility called everything into question. As I searched my husband's face, I saw the torn anguish of a man caught between the wife he loved and the daughter who was supposed to be his pride and joy. Was this to be my new normal, a teenager's misguided hatred threatening to destroy my marriage before it even really began? A upwelling of dread knotted my stomach as I realized that this was like just the first salvo in what was shaping up to be a very long and painful battle. 2 weeks after the shocking text message revelation, the moment I had been dreading finally arrived. Brielle was coming to live with us. Clayton's ex-wife had gotten a job transfer out of state, forcing the teenage terror to shack up in our peaceful suburban home. I tried to remain optimistic as Clayton and I stood in the driveway, awaiting her arrival. Maybe those hateful texts had just been an angsty outburst, and she wouldn't be as bad in person. Clayton kept assuring me that she was basically a good kid, if a bit rough around the edges at times. A beat-up pickup truck pulled up to the curb, music blaring from the open windows. The driver's side door flung open and out stepped Brielle, somehow managing to make even casual attire look like a deliberate act of defiance. Dark eye makeup rimmed her scowling gaze as she looked from Clayton to me with undisguised disdain. My heart sank as I immediately recognized the depth of loathing in her eyes. The messages had been no exaggeration. "Hey, sweetie, it's so good to see you." Clayton started towards her with open arms, obvious affection shining through. Brielle recoiled away from his attempted embrace, scowling even deeper. Yeah, Dad. Can we just get this over with?" An uncomfortable silence hung in the air for a moment. Clayton shot me an awkward grimace before clearing his throat. "Well, you remember my wife Leona, right, honey? We've been really looking forward to you coming to stay with us for a while." Brielle fixed me with a cold look of disgust that sent a shiver down my spine. Unfortunately, yes, she's kind of hard to forget or ignore, since she swooped in to take advantage of you so fast after Mom left. My jaw dropped at the brazen accusation dripping with venom. "Excuse me? That is extremely uncalled for, young lady. I think you owe me an apology right this instant." "Ha! And she's self-righteous too. How charming," Brielle sneered with a mocking laugh, cutting off my outraged retort. "Trust me, Dad, this is going to be a real treat living with the wicked step-monster from hell." I felt Clayton tense beside me, finally shifting into disciplinary mode. "Brielle Elizabeth Coleman, you watch your mouth. That's no way to speak to Leona after everything she's done to welcome you here." Brielle rolled her eyes so hard it should have strained them. "Whatever. I didn't ask for any of this welcome charade. I totally saw through this sham from day one." With a defiant toss of her hair, she stormed past us towards the house, shoving Clayton's reaching arm aside as he tried to stop her. The sound of her truck's driver's side door slamming shut made me flinch. My husband turned to me with a pained, apologetic look. "Leona, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's gotten into her lately." "Spare me," I spat out, feeling the bulwark of my self-control cracking under the verbal onslaught. "Your daughter is a vile, disrespectful little monster who seems determined to make both our lives miserable. And if you can't see that or don't plan to do anything about it, then we have an even bigger problem here." Whirling away from his stunned expression, I stormed into the house and up to the guest bedroom, fighting back angry tears streaking my cheeks. That girl was going to rue the day she decided to take me on. I would make sure of it. If this was how Brielle wanted to play, then game on. That sociopathic brat had just awoken a petty, vengeful side of me that would stop at nothing until she got her bitter attitude in check. One way or another, I was going to make that little monster respect me as the woman of this household. Even if I had to resort to devious, underhanded measures to do it, the gloves were officially off. Things only went from bad to worse after Brielle's dramatic arrival. Over the next few weeks, her behavior became increasingly unhinged and disruptive. She would blast music at all hours, leave messes everywhere, and routinely insult or disparage me to my face. Clayton tried to play referee, but nothing seemed to get through to his darling daughter. The worst incident happened when I was throwing a housewarming party with friends from my book club. I had spent days making sure every detail was perfect, from the decorations down to the inspired menu selections. This was my opportunity to make a good impression on the neighborhood wives who had initially been skeptical about my hasty marriage. Of course, Brielle saw fit to go out of her way to try sabotaging my big evening. It began with her stalking around the party in an obscenely skimpy outfit, guzzling beer and cursing up a storm right in front of my prim guests. Their expressions of shock and disgust were palpable as she made crude, inappropriate jokes at every opportunity. When I pulled her aside and firmly ordered Brielle to go to her room until the party was over, she loudly called me a stuck-up prude within earshot of everyone gathered. I felt my cheeks flaming red as the guests looked on in mortified silence. Finally reaching my limit, I threatened to call the police and have Brielle taken away if she refused to behave. That twisted smirk crossed her lips, the same one I had come to dread more than anything else. "Yeah, sure, you go ahead and do that," she sneered. "I'll just tell the nice officers all about how you slapped me around last week while drunk for no reason. They'll have to take your abusive ass to jail instead." It was a bald-faced lie, but there was no doubt in my mind Brielle would follow through on her threat. She had created the perfect scenario to make me look like a villain in front of everyone. Shaking with rage and humiliation, I watched helplessly as Brielle slinked off without another word. A couple of my friends began whispering and pointing, stealing furtive glances in my direction as the wretched drama unfolded. I could only wonder what kind of sordid gossip that evil girl had planted in their minds. The rest of the evening was nearly ruined for me. No matter how hard I tried to get back into hostess mode and act like nothing had happened, a dark pall had been cast over the festivities. My book club ladies kept their distance, offering me tight smiles and quickly changing the subject any time Brielle's behavior came up. Clayton finally arrived home when it was nearly over, oblivious to the chaos. His apologetic expression told me he had already gotten an earful from Brielle about her warped perspective of the night's events. I didn't even bother arguing with him when he pulled me aside with a grim look and insisted we talk it through. She's out of control, absolutely out of control. I caught the other wives murmuring to her friend as the last remaining guests made their way out the door. They both cut their gazes sheepishly towards me, as if they had been caught talking behind my back. Something needed to be done about Brielle, that much was crystal clear. Her venomous campaign of terrorizing me had now bled over into tainting my entire social circle's view of me, too. She wouldn't stop until she had painted me as a wicked, abusive monster to everyone. But what options did I have? Every time I tried to discipline her, Brielle would twist the story to make me seem even worse. And Clayton was too distracted with work and blinded by fatherly love to see the true depths of his daughter's depravity. As if reading my chaotic thoughts, Brielle flashed me a poisonous smile from across the room and mouthed a single word: checkmate. The vicious brat thought she had already won, that I was beaten into submission. But something inside me hardened with firm resolution in that moment. If Brielle wanted an all-out war, then I would happily oblige. This was swiftly evolving into a case of kill or be killed within my own household. And I didn't intend to go down without an epic fight to defend what was rightfully mine. No matter how despicable I would have to become or what weapons of deception I was forced to unleash, I would not allow that malignant brat to take everything away from me. If scorched earth revenge was the only solution, then so be it. Brielle had severely underestimated just how far I was willing to go to obliterate her, and by the time I was through, she would regret ever crossing me and my castle. With each passing week, Brielle's vendetta against me only intensified. She seemed utterly determined to make my life as miserable as humanly possible through her unrelenting onslaught of psychological torment. It started with the little things, leaving disgusting messes for me to clean up, forgetting to relay important messages, practically shouting insults at me whenever Clayton wasn't around to witness it. Just enough to keep me constantly on edge, but not quite enough to provoke serious disciplinary action. Then she started getting bolder, like the time she maliciously let the air out of my car tires late at night before an important meeting I was supposed to drive to. Or the week she got a hold of my personal cell phone and sent crude, embarrassing texts to everyone in my contacts list, including my own parents. Clayton was almost never home to see the worst of it thanks to his increasingly demanding travel schedule for work. That brat is lucky he missed the meltdown when I discovered she had sold off my prized jewelry collection behind my back, claiming they were gaudy old relics she had just thrown out. Oh, how I wanted to strangle Brielle with my bare hands that day. Only the terrifying thought of making things even worse by losing total control stopped me. My wise old mother had called after one of Brielle's more vindictive stunts, sensing the desperation in my voice. "You have to be the bigger person here, no matter how cruel she acts," she had cautioned. "Stooping to her level will only make you lose this war in the end." But every fiber of my being yearned to lash out, to unshackle the torrent of primal rage burning in my chest. That sociopathic little C-word deserved to suffer as much anguish as she had put me through. If not for Clayton still being in denial about his precious Brielle's evil ways, maybe I could have pressed criminal charges or something. Lord knows I had compiled enough evidence by now of her demented behavior to lock her twisted ass up for years. No, this personal hell was starting to feel inescapable, like Brielle had me trapped in an airtight psychological prison with no way out. Some nights, I even caught myself pondering whether extreme measures were called for to break free, if permanently neutralizing the threat she posed was the only viable solution. I quickly banished those dark thoughts, not wanting to stray into territory I could never return from. There had to be a better way of handling Brielle, one that played more towards my intellectual strengths. Maybe I could somehow beat her at her own insidious game. It was during one of Clayton's fleeting visits home when the idea finally sparked in my mind. He was sitting on the couch looking drained after another week of constant business trips. Brielle had the TV blaring some inane reality show, clearly just to be obnoxious. "Could you please turn that down?" Clayton sighed, tiredly pinching the bridge of his nose. "I've got such a headache right now." Instead of complying, Brielle just rolled her eyes and deliberately raised the volume even higher, flashing me a mocking smirk as she did so. That insufferable, disrespectful look she always gave was like a red flag taunting a raging bull. "That's it, I've had enough," I declared, snatching the remote from Brielle's hands and switching off the TV entirely. She opened her mouth, undoubtedly to unleash another scathing barrage of insults, but I cut her off. "No, you listen to me for once. Your behavior lately has been utterly deplorable, young lady. I'm putting my foot down. From now on, things are going to change around here. Understand?" Brielle favored me with her most scathing glower yet. "Oh yeah, and what exactly are you going to do about it, you miserable battle axe?" My lips curled into a thin, devious smile as the perfect idea blossomed in my mind's eye. "Just you wait, Brielle. You'll find out soon enough. I'm done playing nice and holding back." She wanted to see the monstrously petty lengths I could stoop? She wanted total war within this household? Fine, then. She was about to get her deepest, darkest wish. It was time to stop walking on eggshells and fight fire with hellfire itself. Gloves off, no more holding back. From here on out, Brielle had better be prepared for the unrelenting psychological onslaught I was ready to unleash. No more misses. Nice girl, Brielle was about to realize the fatal miscalculation she had made in waging this battle against me. By the time I was done, she would be a shattered, submissive wreck begging me for mercy. I was going to systematically dismantle her vindictive schemes, turning her own wicked methods against her until she had no choice but to accept defeat. One deliciously devious ploy at a time, the vicious games were only just beginning. That ungrateful little gargoyle was about to learn you do not mess with Leona. And just like that, the perfect opportunity to unleash the opening salvo of my sinister mind games fell into my lap. A historic winter storm was bearing down on our area, promising to bury us under multiple feet of snow. Schools and businesses started announcing closures days in advance to brace for the brunt of the freeze. Clayton had been slated to return home in time to ride out the blizzard with us, but of course his company prioritized him being on site for some last-minute contract negotiations in Chicago instead. "I'm so sorry. It looks like I'm going to have to stay put here until the storm passes," he had told me over the phone, his voice laced with weary resignation. "Brielle behaving herself okay for you?" I glanced over to where his darling daughter was sprawled out on the living room couch, absent-mindedly flicking pieces of tortilla chip across the floor as she stared at her phone. Catching my smoldering glare, she flashed me a mocking sneer and pointedly crunched an entire mouthful of chips, spitting chunks of debris across the carpet. "Oh yes, she's just been an absolute delight, as always," I responded through gritted teeth. "Don't worry about us, babe. You just focus on doing what you need to do. I can handle things here until you get back." With the snow already starting to steadily accumulate outside, I knew this was my prime chance to put the first stage of my master plan into motion. I just needed to set the trap and lure Brielle right into it. After accidentally unplugging the Wi-Fi router and TV cable box, I hid away in my bedroom with my laptop and a walkie-talkie I picked up from the hardware store. Several hateful texts and slew of profanity-laced insults came bellowing through my door, demanding I fix the internet and television immediately. I responded in a sickeningly sweet tone over the walkie that I was so very sorry, but it looked like the storm must have knocked everything out until it passed over. Brielle's reaction was as explosive as I had hoped. Curse words and hurled objects echoed through the house as her temper tantrum reached deafening new levels. Finally, after nearly an hour of whining and shrieking threats of bodily harm, she seemed to resign herself to entertaining me during this internet blackout. Banging and clattering resonated down the hallway from the living room as she began concocting some fresh hell. Perfect. Time for phase 2. I crept towards the garage and picked up the old can of industrial-strength pepper spray I had stashed there for this occasion. Just a few well-aimed bursts throughout the living room and kitchen, concentrated around Brielle's little nest. The screams of agony and sputtering, hacking coughs music to my ears as the noxious fumes no doubt swirled around her in a scorching crimson haze. I could picture Brielle's eyes watering and burning, her throat convulsing as she gagged for clean air. "What the hell is this? "Oh, God, I can't breathe," she wailed between anguished coughing fits. "Leona, you crazy bitch, I'll kill you for this." Phase 3 was ready. I texted Clayton to let him know the storm must have disrupted the air quality systems, filling our home with exhaust fumes that were rapidly becoming dangerous. I tearfully begged him to send an emergency crew to come extract Brielle and take her somewhere safe, away from the toxic air. He promised to summon the fire department immediately. Of course, by the time they arrived on scene, the pepper spray's effects would have already started to wear off on Brielle, leaving only her streaming eyes and lingering raspy throat as evidence something had been amiss. But she was hysterical enough by that point to corroborate there had been contaminants leaking into the house, making it unsafe. Within the hour, I stood in the doorway watching with deep satisfaction as Brielle was loaded into an ambulance, still coughing and swearing vengeance against me through choked gasps. That miserable little wretch looked utterly pathetic, exactly the way I had envisioned when hatching this plan. Everything had gone perfectly. As the vehicles pulled away and the blizzard howled outside, I made my way back inside, alone at last in the eerie silence. A triumphant smile crept across my face as I imagined Brielle's outrage when she eventually realized her surroundings were not contaminated after all. That I had masterminded this whole scheme just to have her forcibly removed and trapped elsewhere. While she was stuck in the evacuation shelters, I would be free to focus on preparing the next, even more devastating psychological torment designed to shatter her spirit once and for all. The opening shots had been fired, the chess pieces moving into position. This was only the beginning of my merciless crusade to make Brielle's life a living nightmare of carefully calculated cruelty. The fun and games were just getting started. 3 agonizingly long days passed before Brielle was finally allowed to return home. I could only imagine the torrent of vitriol she must have unleashed upon being released from that shelter, berating the poor staff about the toxic leak that had turned out to be nothing. When she stalked through the front door, tracking slushy footprints across the foyer, the look of murderous fury blazing in her eyes was almost palpable. I greeted the seething hellion with a sugary sweet smile from my position on the living room couch. "Why, welcome home, sweetie. I was so worried about you having to stay cramped up in that evacuation center all this time." Brielle's hands clenched into trembling fists as she visibly fought to contain the torrent of rage boiling inside her. When she finally spoke, her voice was a low, quavering growl of barely restrained violence. "You think you're so goddamn clever, don't you? Pulling that deranged little stunt to get me thrown out during the storm. Whatever do you mean?" I countered with a dismissive laugh, feigning innocence even as my heart pounded with intoxicating adrenaline. "I simply did what any concerned and responsible adult would have in that situation to keep you safe." "Cut the bullshit act!" Brielle exploded, flecks of spittle flying as she shook with fury. "I know you orchestrated the whole thing, you twisted, manipulative witch." For a split second, a flicker of doubt lanced through me. Perhaps I had underestimated just how unhinged Brielle's mental state truly was and stirred something too dark and volatile. But before I could entertain those concerns further, the vicious words kept spewing from her lips. "You set me up and had me dragged away into some cold, crowded shelter filled with bums, drug addicts, and freaks? Do you have any idea the trauma and humiliation I endured because of your pathetic need to pull some mastermind power play?" Her chest heaved with sharp, ragged breaths as her building tirade devolved into a guttural scream of pure fury. "I swear to God, if you ever pull anything like that again, there won't be enough pieces left to bury." Bold words from such an entitled, insolent little maggot. Yet a part of me couldn't help but crave the unadulterated venom dripping from them. This was exactly the reaction I had been craving to witness with my own eyes. Brielle completely unraveled, dominance shattered, raw emotions scorching through her veins. Forget physical threats. It was her vulnerability in these moments that provided the ultimate high. My carefully orchestrated torture was beginning to shred away that bitch's prickly layers of arrogance and disdain, one anguished yelp at a time. "Oh, Brielle, you'd be wise to watch that temper of yours," I chided with a patronizing smirk. Getting so worked up isn't at all becoming of a young lady. Fuck you. The snarled retort nearly caused me to shiver with delight. Just a bit more goading, a few extra prods against her exposed nerve endings, and maybe she would finally snap entirely. Suddenly, an idea sparked in my mind. One last push to drive her right over the edge into full-fledged meltdown. Keeping my features carefully impassive, I rose from the couch and began strolling across the room, all while reaching into my pocket to extract a small object. Brielle immediately tensed further, fists clenched and body braced for an attack as she watched me approach with narrowed, hateful eyes. Yet, when I extended my hand towards her, she recoiled in surprise to find I was merely holding a voice recorder. With a flick of my thumb, I let the device's replay function burst to life, filling the crackling silence between us. Won't be enough pieces left to bury. Brielle's own shrieked threat echoed all around us, harsh and unmistakable, even as her expression contorted in shock and horror. A coldly triumphant smile curled across my lips. You hear that, you vicious little gargoyle? I have all the evidence I need of your murderous inclinations right here, safely preserved. So go ahead, make good on your psychotic ramblings and try to make a move against me. She opened her mouth, but I swiftly cut her off with a cruel chuckle. No? Nothing to say now that the tables are turned? That's what I thought. You're not quite as tough as you try to play off when you're the one left dangerously exposed. It was delicious to watch Brielle's face flush with impotent rage and humiliation as she realized her own malignant temper had been used to entrap her. The vicious, uncontrolled outburst rendered absolutely toothless by the mere flick of a switch. Basking in the surge of power, I pressed my advantage by leaning in close to deliver the final verbal barbs in a low growl. Consider this your one and only warning, little girl. Open that hateful, entitled mouth of yours to threaten me again, and Clayton will be getting an earful of this recording, along with a call to the police. So why don't you be a good brat and run along before I really lose my patience? Brielle's lips mashed into a thin, bloodless line as a muscle danced in her jaw, awash with seething yet trapped anger. All I could do was smile as I watched her turn on a booted heel and stalk away towards her bedroom, deflated and defeated. The first great victory was mine. She had just been driven home nice and hard, just how outmatched she truly was in this war. But far from sating my appetite for revenge, that fleeting taste of dominance left me ravenously hungry to completely shatter her pathetic bravado once and for all. This was just the opening parry of what promised to be an utterly brutal, drawn-out psychological beating. I would break her down piece by degrading piece until there was nothing left but a whimpering, broken shadow to scurry away from my mere presence. And she would have no one to blame for creating the torment, but her own vile conduct and disrespect that had sealed her torturous fate. Let the games continue, and may the cruelest bitch reign victorious. Clayton's return home was like a brewing storm front finally breaking. The tension crackling through the air over the past weeks reached a fever pitch, ready to erupt in a maelstrom of harsh truths. I had prepared myself for this inevitable confrontation by stockpiling an arsenal of damning evidence against Brielle. Every threatening text message, insulting voicemail, video clip of her belligerent meltdowns, it was all meticulously catalogued and primed to unleash upon his arrival. The vicious hostility simmering between Brielle and I was impossible to ignore as soon as Clayton walked through the door. He paused in the entryway, shoulders slumping wearily as he took in the potent atmosphere of silent fury. "Why does it feel like a war zone in here?" Brielle immediately opened her mouth, undoubtedly to spew forth a litany of twisted lies and manipulated half-truths about the torment I had been subjecting her to. But I swiftly cut her diatribe off before those poisonous words could do any further damage. "Save it, Brielle," I snapped, leveling an accusatory glare at the petulant brat still poised to launch into hysterics. "Your father's finally going to learn about the reality of your depraved conduct in this household. No more smoke and mirror games from you." Clayton's brow furrowed in obvious confusion and concern as I snatched up the thick file folder crammed with indisputable proof. With a defiant toss of my hair, I thrust the catalog of compiled evidence towards his chest, forcing him to reflexively take hold of it. Take a good long look through there, dear husband, if you can stomach it. Maybe then you'll finally accept the harsh reality of what kind of toxic, abusive monster your precious little angel has been acting like towards me. Leona? What is all this? Clayton sighed, flipping through a few pages with a pained grimace. I could practically see his natural defensiveness already beginning to flare up in protection of his child. Evidence! I shot back fiercely. Documented proof of the unrelenting torment your deranged offspring has been putting me through for months now. Brielle tried to protest, indignant sneers and scowls already contorting her features, but I swiftly rounded on her with bared fangs. Don't even try denying it, you miserable little wretch. I have everything right here. Recordings, videos, written transcripts, the entire ugly truth, all laid bare at last. Just try and talk your way out of this with more of your sickening compulsive lies. Clayton's patience had clearly reached its limit. Snapping the folder shut, he fixed us both with a stern, commanding glare that immediately quelled the dueling outbursts. That is enough from both of you. Brielle, go wait in the other room while I try to make sense of this madness going on. And Leona, you too. I need a few minutes alone to process everything. Though incredulous frustration burned inside me at being temporarily dismissed, I bit back any protests and obeyed, not wishing to push him any further while I held the high ground. As I stalked out of the room, I noticed Brielle remained rooted in place, arms crossed defiantly. Did you not hear me? Clayton's raised voice carried an unmistakable air of authority none of us dared defy. I said, go wait and let me handle this. Brielle shot me one last withering glare of pure loathing before slinking off to the other room without a word. I couldn't resist a smug smile of satisfaction as I took up position just outside the doorway's earshot. It would be so delicious to hear Clayton righteously tearing into her after her reprehensible antics. The muted tones of his lecturing voice rumbled for nearly an hour, punctuated by her occasional terse interjections, quickly silenced. At one point, a particularly harsh bark of rebuke made me almost feel a twinge of pity for the scalding parental onslaught she was undoubtedly absorbing. Almost. For all the agony and humiliation Brielle's rained down on me, this verbal flaying would barely begin to equate fair retribution. She deserved far worse than just a censuring lecture, and once Clayton calmed down, perhaps I would be able to convince him she needed even harsher repercussions. Finally, the door creaked open, and Clayton reappeared looking utterly crestfallen and drained. His eyes swam with warring emotions, disappointment, anger, shame, as they settled wearily on me. Leona, I can't even begin to find the words to describe how sorry and appalled I am at the way Brielle has been behaving. This is utterly unacceptable conduct, and it ends right now. You believe me, then? I couldn't resist asking with bated breath. He nodded warily, pinching the bridge of his nose in evident dismay. Yes, I believe you, and we need to have a very serious discussion about getting that girl some intensive therapy. My heart fluttered victoriously, giddy waves of vindication and triumph crashing over me. So the hellspawn had been laid bare at last, her web of lies and deception shredded to reveal the remorseless truth. I had won. There was no more denying that fact after such an arduous battle. Yet as I watched Brielle emerge from the other room, eyes downcast and features radiating petulant defiance even after such a thorough dressing down, I couldn't help but feel a gnawing sense that this was far from over. Our gazes locked across the room, twin infernos of blistering hatred and resentment clashing with palpable force. For every ounce of my elation, she burned with even more bitter rage at having her toxic agenda dismantled so completely. This was meant to be the end, her ultimate comeuppance after so many transgressions. But staring into those merciless eyes, I felt an ominous chill trickle down my spine. Perhaps all I had really accomplished was to ignite an even fouler blaze yearning for its own vengeance. In the aftermath of that fateful confrontation, an uneasy truce settled over the household. Brielle seethed in sullen silence, no longer directing open hostilities my way, yet still radiating palpable resentment whenever we occupied the same space. For my part, I basked in the glow of hard-won vindication, savoring my triumph over her vile scheming. Clayton remained utterly dismayed by the entire messy situation, vacillating between disappointment in his daughter's unrepentant conduct and disappointment in himself as a father. Lengthy screaming matches punctuated by deafening silence became the new norm as he struggled to find a path forward. She needs professional help, Leona. This level of anger and acting out isn't normal. It's something deeper and more disturbed. I nodded in solemn agreement as we sat together one evening after another. Unsuccessful attempt at a family discussion had dissolved into explosive tirades. You're right. As much as I would love nothing more than to simply wash my hands of that malignant brat altogether, enabling her toxic behavior any further isn't an option. Clayton sighed, features etched deep with weary resignation. I think it may be time to send her back to her mother's permanently. Get Brielle into an intensive program somewhere to get the help she so desperately needs before her issues metastasize even further. The balm of those words was soothing to my very soul, a chance to finally excise the poisonous influence from our lives once and for all. Yet I maintained a carefully impassive expression, not wanting to appear too eager. If you truly believe that's best, dear, then you have my full support. I want nothing more than to fix this fractured family, but your daughter's well-being has to take priority over everything. Thank you, he murmured, reaching over to give my hand an appreciative squeeze. Thank you for being so understanding through this whole torturous ordeal. I hope it's not too late for Brielle to find her way back from that dark path she started down. I forced a small, reassuring smile in return as that gnawing sense of victory blossomed in my chest. Soon, the waking nightmare would finally be over. Unsurprisingly, Brielle's reaction to the news about being sent away for treatment bordered on outright hostility. She ricocheted wildly between scathing insults, venomous threats, and desperate, pleading promises to behave, anything to cling to even a shred of control over the deteriorating situation. But Clayton's mind was made up, his patience and tolerance utterly depleted by her toxic conduct. Brielle's vindictive tantrums could no longer sway him. She had simply crossed one line too many, somewhere along the way. The day she was due to depart, a tense pall hung over the house. I couldn't quite conceal a slight satisfied smirk when she descended the stairs with her belongings in tow, glowering daggers in my direction. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts, she hissed under her breath as we passed in the hallway. One of these days, you'll get yours. I arched an eyebrow but otherwise remained impassive, causing her eyes to narrow into hateful slits. No matter how tempting the prospect was to hurl a few final parting shots, it felt somehow beneath me at this late stage. The battle was over, and the victor decided. Any further cruelty now would simply be excessive. Brielle had been utterly routed, her own malignant machinations catalyzing a devastatingly permanent exit from our lives. Allowing her to slink off while clinging to even a shred of dignity felt like the most utterly galling punishment of all. Let her wretched, fragile ego be the final victim as karma rendered its ultimate verdict. At long last, the front door opened and she cast one final look over her shoulder at me. Pride and venom warred across her features as she opened her mouth, poised to unleash a torrent of hate, only for her expression to crumple as Clayton pulled her into an unexpected, bone-crushing embrace she seemed powerless against. "It's going to be okay, baby," he murmured into her ear, sounding dangerously close to tears himself. We're going to get you the help you need so you can finally heal. I'll make this right, I swear." For a precious fleeting moment, a tiny crack exposed the broken, anguished child still lurking behind Brielle's hardened facade. The thinnest glistening of tears welled in her eyes before she blinked them away, features hardening once more into a stoic mask of defiance and denial. With one final backwards glare of utter contempt directed squarely at me, Brielle finally allowed herself to be led towards the waiting car destined to carry her towards her court-appointed treatment program. Part of me wondered if this would finally break the cycle of hatred, or merely plant the seeds for all new conflicts yet to come. Only time would tell if her demons could truly be exorcised, if she stood any chance of one day emerging rehabilitated. But for now, all I cared about was the overwhelming relief of having that cancerous presence removed from our household at last. As the car pulled away, I felt Clayton's hand slip into mine and give a reassuring squeeze. A sad, weary smile tugged at the corner of his mouth when our eyes met, that unmistakable gratitude for the fresh start we had both sacrificed so much to seize radiating from his gaze. At long last, all the pain and torment had finally achieved its purpose. Our castle was ours again.